In the dusty motor pool, she was an invisible mechanic, but when the four-star general saw the phoenix tattoo on her arm, he froze. That wasn't just a tattoo. It was the only trace left of an elite squad, betrayed and wiped from history a decade ago, and the man behind the tragedy is about to face the only ghost who survived. The Chihuahuan desert sun beat down on Fort Gideon with a merciless white-hot intensity, turning every sheet of metal into a blistering griddle. It was a late September afternoon, but the heat clung to the air like a physical weight, distorting the horizon into a shimmering haze. For most, it was an oppressive force to be endured, but inside the cavernous, echoing motor pool, Ilara Vance found a sanctuary. The air here was cooler, thick with the familiar, grounding sense of grease, solvent, and hot steel. At 30, Ilara possessed a quiet beauty that seemed almost out of place amidst the rugged machinery. Her skin was fair, untouched by the desert sun, and her dark, nearly black hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun at the nape of her neck, not a single strand escaping. Dressed in standard-issue olive-drab coveralls, the fabric stained with the honest marks of her trade, she moved with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. Each turn of the wrench, each wipe of a rag, was deliberate and precise. For Ilara, this was not a job. It was a ritual. Reassembling broken machines was the only way she knew how to keep her own fractured soul from falling apart. Her self-imposed tranquility was broken by a voice laced with youthful arrogance. "Hey, Vance." Corporal Leo Martinez, barely 22, stood with his arms crossed, his desert combat uniform crisp and immaculate. He was the picture of a model soldier, sharp haircut, confident posture, and an unshakable belief in the regulations he had memorized. He looked at Ilara, a civilian contractor, with a poorly concealed disdain. "You sure that torque spec is right? We don't need a suspension strut coming loose on patrol." Ilara didn't look up from her work on the armored patrol vehicle. 300 foot-pounds, Corporal. "As per the manual you're so fond of," she replied, her voice low and even, carrying no hint of sarcasm, only fact. "It's not going anywhere." Martinez grunted, unconvinced. "Civilians?" he muttered to a fellow soldier as he walked away. "They get paid by the hour to fix our rides, then go home to their soft beds. What do they know about depending on these bolts with your life?" He was the voice of a common sentiment among the younger troops, a suspicion of anyone who wasn't sworn into the same tribe. That fragile peace and Martinez's petty grievances shattered at 1400 hours with the arrival of General Alistair Finch, a four-star general from the Pentagon. Finch was a man who seemed carved from granite and resolve. Now in his early 50s, his hair was more salt than pepper at the temples, and his piercing blue eyes held the weary weight of decades spent making impossible decisions. His visit to Fort Gideon was not a routine inspection. He was here to evaluate a proposal from a defense contractor, Aegis Dynamics, for a new state-of-the-art surveillance drone system. Privately, Finch was skeptical, believing the military was becoming dangerously over-reliant on technology at the expense of the human element. The grit and courage he had seen win battles no algorithm could predict. As he strode through the motor pool, his aide-de-camp trailing behind him, the usual clatter and banter of the mechanics subsided into a respectful hush. The general's gaze swept professionally over the equipment, his expression unreadable until it fell upon Ilara. And then he stopped. The halt was so abrupt, his aide nearly collided with him. The air around the general seemed to crackle and freeze. All the authority, the four-star composure, evaporated in an instant. His face, a moment before a mask of command, went pale. His eyes widened, fixed on Ilara's right arm. As she reached up to adjust a hydraulic line, the sleeve of her coveralls tightened, revealing the tattoo on her bicep. It was a masterpiece of ink and artistry, a single, magnificent phoenix feather, its barbs glowing with shades of crimson and gold, intricately wrapped around the broken links of a steel chain. It was a symbol of fiery rebirth and shattered bondage. Ilara felt the weight of his stare and slowly lowered her arm, turning to face him. Her clear blue eyes met his shocked gaze. There was no surprise in her expression, no fear, only the quiet, exhausted resignation of a ghost that has finally been seen. "General?" his aide asked, his voice a nervous whisper. Finch didn't hear him. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at the woman and the impossible symbol on her arm, a symbol that belonged to a classified file buried so deep it officially didn't exist, a symbol that belonged to the dead. As if breaking free from a trance, the general turned sharply on his heel and strode out of the motor pool, his long, powerful strides eating up the concrete. He didn't look back. He left a profound, questioning silence in his wake. Every mechanic, including a dumbfounded Corporal Martinez, was now staring at Alara. In the space of 30 seconds, she had transformed from an invisible civilian to the epicenter of an explosive mystery. The spark had been lit in the silence, and Alara knew, with a familiar sinking feeling, that the fire was coming. In the sterile quiet of his temporary office, General Finch paced like a caged wolf. The desert night offered no solace, only a vast, indifferent darkness. The image of the phoenix feather was burned into his mind, a brand of a past he thought was buried under a decade of reports and promotions. Sleep was an impossibility. His aide-de-camp, Captain Eva Rostova, stood by silently. A woman in her early 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to accentuate her fierce focus. Rostova was more than an aide. She was a premier data analyst who could find a needle in a digital haystack the size of a continent. She was fiercely loyal and knew the general's moods better than he did himself. "Get me everything on Operation Nightingale," Finch commanded, his voice a low growl. "Highest priority, alpha-level clearance, mine." Rostova didn't question the order, though her eyes flickered with surprise. Nightingale was a ghost file, a legendary failure whispered about in intelligence circles. On her encrypted tablet, she worked her magic. Minutes later, the file appeared on the large screen in the office. It was a digital graveyard. Page after page of blacked-out text, redacted paragraphs, and conflicting timelines. The official summary was an insult to the men and women who had died. Mission compromised due to unforeseen geological shifts affecting intelligence signals. Echo Squad KIA, no survivors. It was too neat, too clean. "Faulty intelligence," Finch scoffed, staring at the screen with disgust. 6 of the best operators this country has ever produced, wiped out because the ground shifted. It's a lie. He saw the pattern now, a cover-up designed to be absolute. "Ava," he said, turning to his aide, "I want you to start digging, unofficially. I want to know every supplier, every contractor, every whisper associated with Nightingale. I want to know who benefited from their deaths." The next morning, the motor pool was a hive of whispers. The story of the general's abrupt departure had spread like wildfire. Soldiers who once barely registered Alara's presence now watched her from the corners of their eyes. The quiet space she had cultivated around herself had been invaded. Corporal Martinez felt a growing irritation. All this fuss over a civilian mechanic. The whispers elevated her to some kind of mythic figure, and it offended his structured by-the-book worldview. He needed to prove to everyone, and perhaps to himself, that she was just ordinary. While Alara was briefly called away to consult on a generator issue, Martinez saw his chance. He moved over to the patrol vehicle she had been working on, a sly look on his face. With a quick, practiced motion, he loosened a single hose clamp on the main fuel line. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to work itself free under the vibrations of a patrol, causing a stall. It was a small, petty act of sabotage, a test he was certain she would fail. Later that morning, General Finch sat down for his scheduled video conference. On the screen, the face of Marcus Thorne materialized. The CEO of Aegis Dynamics was a man in his late 40s, radiating a polished, predatory charm. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his silvering hair perfectly coiffed. He looked more like a movie star than a defense contractor. "General Finch, an honor," Thorne began, his voice a smooth, persuasive baritone. He launched into his presentation, showcasing sleek animations of his company's surveillance drones. "Our system provides total situational awareness. It eliminates the fog of war, the very kind of intelligence failure that leads to tragedies." Then he delivered the line that made the blood in Finch's veins run cold. "Imagine," Thorne said, his expression a mask of feigned sympathy, "if we'd had this technology a decade ago. Brave soldiers like those in Echo Squad might still be with us today. Such a terrible, needless loss." The name Echo Squad hung in the air between them. Thorne said it with practiced sorrow, but Finch saw something else flicker in the man's eyes. It wasn't grief. It was the self-satisfied gleam of a predator picking over a carcass. A cold, hard certainty began to crystallize in the general's mind. This man wasn't just using a tragedy to sell his weapons. He was enjoying it. The day after the general's visit, an uneasy quiet settled over the motor pool. The usual boisterous jokes and complaints were replaced by muted conversations and sideways glances at Alara. She ignored it, focusing on the final diagnostic checks of the patrol vehicle Martinez's squad used. Her fingers, sensitive from years of work, moved with an expert's touch over the engine block. They stopped at the main fuel line. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The hose clamp was loose. Not dangerously so, but enough that it would have failed under pressure. It was a careless mistake, one a rookie might make. Or it was intentional. She didn't look for Martinez. She simply took a wrench from her toolkit, tightened the clamp to the precise torque, and then paused. From the bottom drawer of her rolling chest, she retrieved a specific tool, a ratcheting wrench with a high-grip, ergonomic handle designed to prevent slippage in oily conditions. She placed it neatly on the vehicle's fender before moving on. Later, when Martinez came to collect the vehicle, he saw the tool. Alara was across the bay, working. "That wrench has a better grip," she called out, her voice calm, not looking at him. "Helps prevent your hand from slipping on the tight ones." The words were simple, practical, but they landed on Martinez like a physical blow. There was no accusation, only a quiet offer of grace. Shame, hot and unfamiliar, washed over him. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the desert sky, casting long shadows from the machinery, General Finch returned to the motor pool. He walked alone. The oppressive heat of the day was finally breaking, replaced by a cool evening breeze. He found Alara wiping down her tools, the rhythmic motions a final part of her daily ritual. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice low, stripped of its usual command. "I didn't come back to apologize. I came back because I believe Operation Nightingale wasn't a failure. It was a setup." Alara's hands stilled. She kept her back to him, her shoulders tense. "The past is dead, General. Let it stay that way." "The 5 people who died with you don't have that luxury," Finch pressed, his voice hardening with conviction. "Their names are currently tied to a lie, a footnote in a file about faulty intelligence. Their honor isn't dead. It deserves the truth." That broke through her carefully constructed walls. She turned slowly, her blue eyes shimmering with a decade of unshed grief. The dam of her silence finally cracked. "It wasn't faulty intelligence," she whispered, the words raw and painful. "We were betrayed. We walked into a kill box. They were waiting for us, General. They knew our exact route, our numbers, our comms frequencies. They were waiting." Miles away, in a secure data bunker deep within the Pentagon, Captain Rostova stared at her screen, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. She had followed the ghost trails of Nightingale through a labyrinth of shell corporations and redacted contracts. Then she found it. A single encrypted transaction hidden within the financials of an offshore holding company. "General," she said into her secure comms link, her voice tight with excitement. "I think I have him." On the screen in Finch's temporary office, a diagram appeared. It showed a payment of $50 million, transferred from a shell corporation named Helios Logistics to a private numbered Swiss bank account. The owner of the account, Marcus Thorne. The date of the transfer, 3 days after the official report on the failure of Operation Nightingale. "Helios Logistics is a front," Rostova explained, her voice crisp. "Its primary business is supplying untraceable military hardware to private mercenary groups, including the very group that ambushed Echo Squad." The pieces slammed together in Finch's mind with sickening clarity. Thorne hadn't just made a mistake. He had sold them out. He had engineered the mission's failure, sacrificed 6 elite operators, all to create a tragedy he could then leverage to sell his drone technology. It wasn't just murder for profit. It was treason of the highest order. Just as the full weight of the betrayal settled on Finch, a frantic voice crackled over the base-wide radio network. "All call signs. This is Sabre 3. We're disabled. Repeat, we are disabled. Location grid, 7-9er. Multiple hydraulic failures. We've lost all controls. It was Martinez's squad. Their armored vehicle had broken down in the Coyote's Jaw, a treacherous ravine known for its poor communication and ambush potential. A mechanic's voice came back, confused. Sabre 3? That system has triple redundancy. It can't fail like that. But it had. In the motor pool, Martinez, listening on his handheld, felt a cold dread. He looked at the other mechanics, who were already shaking their heads, talking about needing a heavy recovery vehicle, a process that would take hours. He thought of Alara's quiet competence, of the wrench she had left for him. Swallowing his pride, he grabbed the radio handset. "Command, this is Corporal Martinez. Get Vance, get her now." The request for Alara crackled over the radio, a plea born of desperation. Without a word, she grabbed a specialized go bag, a worn canvas satchel filled not with standard-issue tools, but with the custom-made, improvised instruments of a master mechanic. She climbed into the driver's seat of a light utility vehicle and sped out of the motor pool, leaving a cloud of dust and stunned silence in her wake. She reached the disabled armored vehicle in under 15 minutes. Martinez and his squad, armed and on high alert, watched in awe as she worked. She moved with a calm, surgical precision, bypassing the fried electronics and manually engaging the hydraulic reserves using a bypass valve she fashioned from spare parts. Within 30 minutes, the engine roared back to life. She simply nodded at a speechless Martinez and drove off, disappearing back into the desert twilight. Her actions at the ravine were the final catalyst. That night, she sat with General Finch and Captain Rostova, the weight of a decade of silence finally lifting. She gave her official testimony, her voice steady as she recounted the events of Operation Nightingale. She provided the crucial piece of the puzzle. They used a Spectre frequency jammer, she explained. It was new then, a prototype. It didn't just block our comms, it fed us phantom signals, leading us deeper into the trap. It was a detail only a survivor would know. And a Spectre jammer was a proprietary technology developed by a single company, Marcus Thorne's previous firm, before he founded Aegis Dynamics. The case was now airtight. The survivor's testimony, the financial records, and the technological link formed an unbreakable chain of evidence. Weeks later, Marcus Thorne stood at a podium in a grand Senate hearing room in Washington, D.C., the epitome of corporate power and influence. He spoke smoothly about a future of automated warfare, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Aegis Dynamics, he declared, is not just building drones. We are building a safer world for our soldiers. As he paused for effect, the grand doors at the back of the chamber swung open. Two stone-faced military police officers in full-dress uniform strode in, their boots echoing on the marble floor. They were led by a figure Thorne recognized with a jolt of pure terror. General Alistair Finch. "Marcus Thorne," Finch's voice boomed, cutting through the stunned silence. "By the authority of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you are under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the United States of America." Thorne's face, a moment before a mask of confident charm, collapsed into a canvas of disbelief and horror. The facade was shattered. The military trial was swift and classified. Faced with incontrovertible evidence, Thorne was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was delivered without ceremony. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole at the ADX Florence Supermax facility. Justice, delayed, if force. A decade had finally been served. A quiet ceremony was held a month later in a secluded memorial garden at the Pentagon, hidden from the public eye. The families of Echo Squad stood beside Alara. General Finch, his voice thick with emotion, read each of their names aloud, officially clearing their records. He presented each family and Alara with the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest military honor. "They did not fall," he said, his gaze meeting Alara's. "They were betrayed. They were heroes." Their names were carved onto a new black granite wall, a permanent testament to their sacrifice and ultimate vindication. Months later, back at Fort Gideon, the rhythm of the motor pool had changed. Alara was still there, her hands still stained with grease, But she was no longer a solitary figure. A small group of young mechanics, led by a humbled and deeply respectful Corporal Martinez, gathered around her. They weren't there for official training. They were there because they wanted to learn from the best. "The manual tells you to replace this whole assembly," Alara was saying, pointing to a complex sensor array. "That takes 6 hours. I'm going to show you how to rebuild it in 2. She looked up, her eyes scanning the eager faces watching her. Never trust the machine completely. Trust your hands, trust your eyes, and trust your gut. That's what keeps you alive when everything else fails. She caught Martinez's eye, and he gave her a small, grateful nod. The ghosts of her past were still there, but they no longer haunted her. They stood with her, a silent honor guard. Under the warm desert sun, a genuine smile touched Alara's lips. A smile not of survival, but of peace. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, it had found a new purpose, a new flock to watch over. Alara's story teaches us that for 10 long years, a hero lived in silence, believing her purpose was buried with her past. She thought she was just fixing engines, but she was truly mending a broken spirit, waiting for a sign. Some might call General Finch's arrival a coincidence, a simple chance encounter. But perhaps it was something more. Perhaps it was a small miracle, a moment of divine timing orchestrated by God. He knew a great injustice had been done, and in his time, he sent the one person who could recognize the truth in a simple tattoo. In our own daily lives, we often feel like Alara in her workshop, unseen, unheard, going through the motions. We might think our true purpose is lost or forgotten. But this story reminds us that we are never truly invisible in God's eyes. He sees the strength and honor we carry within us, even when we hide it from the world. A miracle isn't always a grand, earth-shattering event. Sometimes it's a quiet moment, when the right person shows up at the right time to change everything. What part of Alara's journey to justice and peace moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe that truth will always find a way to the light, share this story with others who might need to hear it. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and faith. May God bless you and watch over you always.